Welcome. You have found your way here at the close of the day, and there is nothing more you need to do now, nothing to solve, nothing to carry. So let yourself settle. Lie down and let the weight of your body sink softly into the place where you rest. If the lights are still bright, let them go dim or let them go dark altogether, and let your eyes close whenever they wish to. You do not have to stay awake for any of this. This story is long and slow, and it will keep unfolding gently through the whole of the night, so you may let it play on softly beside you as you drift, and you need not hold on to a single word. Just breathe. Let your breath slow now, in through the nose, soft and unhurried, and out again, longer than it came in, as though you were setting something down that you have carried too far. If it feels good to do so, and only if you wish, you might follow this channel so that these quiet tellings can find their way back to you on other nights like this one. And that is all I will ask of you. From here on, there is only the story, told low and calm, to carry you down into sleep. So let your shoulders loosen, let your jaw unclench, let the day go. And come with me now, back through the long gray mist of the north, to a time before this time, into the old world where the story begins. There is a great tree, older than memory, and it holds the whole of the worlds within its branches and its roots. It is called Yggdrasil, the world tree, and no one has ever seen the whole of it, for its roots go down into places where the light has never reached, and its crown lifts into skies beyond the reach of any climbing thing. Among its branches rest the 9 worlds, cradled like sleeping birds, and one of these worlds, high and bright, is called Asgard, the home of the gods. It is a country of green halls and long meadows, of golden roofs and quiet rivers, ringed round by a high wall, and reached, they say, by a bridge of trembling colors that arches across the empty air like a rainbow made solid enough to walk upon. There, in Asgard, the gods keep their houses, and among all of them, in all that shining country, this story follows one. His name is Thor, and of all the gods, he is perhaps the easiest to love, for he is not distant, and he is not cold, and he does not sit apart wrapped in secrets. He is broad and strong and red-bearded, with a laugh that carries, and eyes that go pale and bright as a storm sky when he is stirred, and warm as hearth coals when he is at ease. He is the god of thunder. When the sky darkens over the world of men, and the great slow drums of the storm begin to roll along the horizon, the old people used to say that it was Thor, riding out across the heavens in his chariot, and that the rumble they heard was the turning of its wheels along the floor of the clouds. He is the friend of ordinary things, of the farmer and the fisherman and the traveler on the road, and where other gods were prayed to for wisdom or for love or for cunning, Thor was prayed to simply for protection, for the strength to stand between a small warm life and the great cold dark that presses always at its edges. Let us stay a while with him before anything happens, before any journey begins, and simply learn the shape of his life, the way you might learn the rooms of a house you're going to sleep in. Thor has a hall of his own in Asgard, and it is called Bilskirnir, which is to say, the far shining, the place that gleams. It is said to be the largest of all the houses of the gods, a long roof held up on a great many pillars, with room enough beneath it for so many hearths and so many people that no one has ever quite counted them. Picture it in the last of the evening light, its timbers dark and its windows glowing gold, smoke rising slow and straight from the roof into a still sky. It is a warm place. It is the kind of place where you would want to be welcomed in from the cold, where the fire never quite goes out, where the benches are worn smooth by long use, and where there is always, always room for one more. Outside his hall stand 2 goats, and they are no ordinary goats, for they draw his chariot across the sky, and they are as much his companions as his beasts of burden. Their names, in the old tongue, mean something like the one who gnashes his teeth and the one who grinds them, which sounds fierce. But picture instead 2 great shaggy creatures, patient and warm-breathed, standing in the grass with their long, strange eyes half closed. And there is a wonder about these goats, a gentle and slightly funny wonder, which is this: that Thor may, if he is hungry and far from home, slaughter them and cook them and share their meat with whoever travels beside him. And then, when the meal is done, he need only lay their skins out upon the ground and gather the bones within them, and raise his hammer over them, and bless them. And in the morning the goats will stand up again, whole and living and ready to run. Only he must be careful. Every bone must be kept unbroken and gathered back, or the goat will limp thereafter. But that is a small thing to remember, and mostly it means that Thor is a god who is never truly without provision, who carries his own warm supper, walking beside him wherever the long roads go. He has a wife, and her name is Sif, and she is known above all for her hair, which is long and golden and heavy, falling like a field of ripe grain in the last of the sun, so bright and so beautiful that it was said to be a marvel even among the gods, who are not easily made to marvel. There is a tenderness in this, in the fact that the strongest of the gods, the one whose hands could break stone, kept beside him a wife whose glory was something so soft and so quiet as the shining of her hair. And there will be a small tale later about that hair, and about how it was lost and made again. But that comes in its own time, and we are only naming things now, only lighting the lamps in the rooms of this life, one by one, so that later you will know your way about. And around him, in that shining country, lived the whole great family of the gods. For Thor was not alone in Asgard. There was his father, Odin, the eldest and the wisest, gray-cloaked and one-eyed, who had given away an eye long ago for a single drink from the well of wisdom, and who wandered often in the world of men in the shape of an old traveler, seeing much and saying little. There was the watchman Heimdall, who stood at the near end of the rainbow bridge and kept the gate of the gods, and whose sight was so keen he could see to the ends of the world, and whose hearing was so fine he could hear the grass growing in the meadows and the wool growing on the backs of the sheep, and who needed less sleep than a bird, so that the way into Asgard was never once left unwatched through all the long ages. There was the bright god Frey, and his sister Freya, fairest of all, who rode in a chariot drawn by cats and wept tears of red gold. And there was that other one, Loki, half friend and half trouble, walking always a little apart. It was a full country and a warm one, alive with voices and feasting and the coming and going of the gods about their errands, and over it all arched that trembling bridge of colors, the only road in, shimmering across the empty air between the world of the gods and the worlds below, a thing so beautiful that no one who saw it ever quite forgot it. Hold that picture a moment, softly, as you settle. a bright country beyond a rainbow, a gate that is always watched, a warm hall where a fire is always burning. You are welcome there tonight, in your drifting. There is room for you by the fire. And then there is the hammer. Of all the things that belong to Thor, the hammer is the one the stories return to again and again, the one you would know him by even in the dark. It is called Mjolnir, and it is not a large and clumsy thing, as you might imagine a hammer to be, but rather short in the handle, and dense and perfect in the head, made of some gray metal that seems to hold a little of the weight of a mountain in it. When Thor throws it, it flies straight to the mark he means, and then, of its own accord, it returns to his hand, curving back through the air like a bird coming home to the roost. It is so precious and so full of power that he wears iron gloves to catch it, and a belt of strength that doubles the might already in his arms. The hammer is his shield and his defense, and the defense of all of Asgard, and the defense, too, of the small, far world of men below. When it is raised, the giants of the frost and the mountains draw back. When it is lost, everything trembles. But how it came to be, how it was made, and why it is short in the handle and not long as a hammer ought to be, that is a story in itself, and it begins, as so many of the old troubles begin, with a piece of mischief. Among the gods of Asgard there walked one who was not quite like the others, and his name was Loki. He was clever, cleverer perhaps than anyone, quick of thought and quick of tongue, able to talk his way into a place and then talk his way out again before anyone had noticed he had gone. He was not wholly of the gods and not wholly of the giants, but something in between, and so he moved always a little apart, half a friend and half a trouble, welcome at the feast and yet never quite trusted at it. He could change his shape as easily as you, or I might change a coat, becoming a bird, a fish, a fly, a mare, whatever suited the moment and the mischief. And it happened, on a day that no one now remembers the reason for, that some restless spirit came over him, and while Sif lay sleeping in the soft afternoon, he crept close, and with a blade he cut away all the golden hair from her head, every last strand of it, so that she woke shorn and bare and grieving. Now you might think this only a small unkindness, a cruel joke, and no more, but Thor did not think it small. When he learned what had been done to his wife, the pale storm came into his eyes, and he went looking for Loki with a purpose that made the trickster, for once, afraid. And when Loki was found and cornered and held fast, he did what he always did when he was caught, which was to promise. He swore that he would make it right, that he would go down into the dark places below the worlds, into the caverns where the dwarves have their forges, and that he would not come back until he carried with him hair of real gold, spun so fine and so cunning that it would grow upon Sif's head as her own hair had grown, living and shining, and even more beautiful than before. And because this was a fair thing to ask, and because it would undo the harm, Thor let him go to do it. So Loki went down, down through the roots of the world, into the country of the dark elves and the dwarves, where the light of the sun never comes, and where instead there is the red glow of 100 forges, and the endless soft ringing of small hammers on the anvil. There is a hush to such places, for all their fire, the hush of deep earth and stone, of things made slowly and made to last. The dwarves are the great smiths of all the worlds, small and broad and skillful beyond telling, and they can shape from metal things that no god could make and no giant dream of. Loki came to the sons of a smith called Ivaldi, and he set them to the task. And they took the fine gold, and they drew it out into threads finer than any thread of flax. And they worked it until they had made a fall of golden hair, so light and so true that when it touched a living head, it would take root there and grow. It was a marvel. And the clever part of Loki, the part that could never leave well enough alone, looked at that marvel and thought that while the forge was hot and the dwarves were willing, he might carry home more than one treasure and win himself a little more favor thereby. So he asked them, and they made besides the hair 2 other wonders, a ship that could be folded up small as a cloth and carried in a pouch, yet unfolded to carry all the gods across the sea, and a spear so perfectly balanced that it would never miss its aim. 3 gifts then, and Loki gathered them up and might have gone home content. But contentment was never Loki's way. As he stood there among the forges with the 3 treasures in his arms, a restless and dangerous mood took him, the mood that had always been his undoing, and he began to boast loudly to another pair of dwarves nearby, 2 brothers, saying that the sons of Ivaldi were the finest smiths in all the worlds, and that no one living could make 3 treasures to equal these. One of the brothers, whose name was Brock, took the challenge, as Loki had known he would, and said that his brother Sindri could make 3 gifts finer still. And Loki, laughing, wagered his own head upon it. If the brother's work was better, they might take his head from his shoulders. That was the bet. And such was Loki's certainty in his own cleverness, and his love of the sharp edge of a gamble, that he thought it a fine and merry thing, and never once considered that he might lose. So the brother named Sindri went to his forge and began his work, and he told Brock that he must stand at the bellows and work them without ceasing, no matter what happened, and that if the flow of air should falter even for a moment, the making would be spoiled. Then Sindri laid something into the fire and went away to speak his words of craft over it, and Brock pumped the bellows, steady and strong, and the fire roared. Now Loki, watching, understood that if these gifts were made perfectly, he would lose his wager, and he did not mean to lose, and so he did a sly thing. He changed himself into a fly, small and quick and stinging, and he landed on the hand of Brock and bit him hard to make him flinch and let the bellows fall. But Brock was a dwarf, patient and stubborn as the stone he worked, and though the sting hurt him, he did not falter, and he worked the bellows on. And when Sindri drew the thing from the fire, it was a marvel. A boar with bristles of pure gold that could run through the air and over the sea faster than any horse, and that would shine and light the darkest night with the glow of its own golden hide. Then Sindri laid a second thing into the fire, and again he warned his brother to keep the air flowing, and again he went away to work his craft, and again Loki came as the biting fly. This time he settled on Brock's neck and stung him twice as sharply, and the pain of it was great, but still the dwarf held on and worked the bellows without pause. And what came out of the fire was a ring of gold, a plain and quiet-seeming thing, but wondrous, for from it there would drop every 9th night 8 more rings of gold as heavy and as fine as itself, so that it was a treasure that made treasure, a spring of endless wealth. and still Loki had not won. Then Sindri laid the last thing into the fire, a great piece of iron, and this time he told his brother that everything depended on the fire being kept even and hot, that if the air failed now, all their work would come to nothing. And Loki, seeing his last chance, came as the fly, and flew straight at Brok's face, and settled upon his eyelid, and bit him there at the very edge of his eye, so cruelly that the blood ran down and filled his eye, and blinded him. And for one instant, only one, Brok let go of the bellows with one hand to wipe the blood from his eye so that he could see. Only for an instant. But it was enough that the fire sank, just a little, just once, and when Sindri drew the last treasure from the coals, he shook his head, for it was very nearly perfect, and yet not quite. It was a hammer, dense and gray, and full of power, that would never fail to strike where it was aimed, and would always return to the hand that threw it, and against which no armor and no wall could stand. But its handle was short, a little too short, because of that single moment when the fire had fallen. That hammer was Mjolnir, and you see now why it is short in the handle, and why, of all the treasures of the gods, it carries within its very shape the memory of a fly's small cruelty and a dwarf's great patience. So the treasures were carried up to Asgard, all 6 of them, the 3 from the sons of Ivaldi, and the 3 from Sindri and Brok, and the gods sat in judgment to decide whose work was best, and so to settle the wager and the fate of Loki's head. The golden hair was given to Sif, and it took root upon her head, and grew and shone more beautifully than ever. The ship and the spear were given out, and the boar and the ring, each a wonder. But when it came to the hammer, and its power was understood, that here was the very thing that would guard Asgard against the giants in all the years to come, the gods judged that this, short handle and all, was the greatest treasure of them all, and so the wager was lost, and Loki's head was forfeit to the dwarf. Loki, of course, being Loki, argued his way out of the letting of blood by a trick of words, saying the dwarf might have his head but not his neck, and that he could not take the one without cutting the other, which had not been part of the bargain. And so Loki kept his head, though not without a lasting grudge. But that is another thread. What matters for us is that the hammer had come into the world, and had come into the hand of Thor, and that from this time on he would be its bearer, the guardian standing at the wall of the worlds. Rest a moment with that thought. The hammer is made. The guardian has his shield, and the long gray seas beyond the wall are full of those who would test him. To understand Thor, you have to understand what stood against him, and it was not a wickedness such as men imagine, not a thing of horns and fire, but something older and colder and more like the weather itself. Beyond the wall of Asgard, out past the edges of the safe green country, lay other worlds, and among them was Jotunheim, the land of the giants. And the giants of the Old North were not simply large men, though they were often very large. They were the powers of the wild and the cold, the frost that cracks the stone, the mountain that will not be moved, the winter that comes down out of the dark and does not care whether a small thing lives or dies. Some of them were beautiful, and some of them were wise, and gods and giants married among one another, and were kin as often as they were foes, so that the line between them was never quite a clean one. But at the heart of it there was an old opposition, as old as the making of the world, between the ordering of things and the unmaking of them, between the warm hall and the killing cold. And in that long, slow struggle, Thor stood at the front, the hammer in his hand. For this was his true work beneath all the tales and the journeys. When the frost pressed too close, when some giant grew too bold and reached his cold hand toward the walls of the gods or toward the little fields of men, it was Thor who went out to meet him. He did not rule, and he did not scheme, and he left the deep counsels to others. He was the one who stood in the doorway. And there is something in that which the old people loved, and which is easy to love still. For most of us are not kings and not wizards. And what we long for when the night is dark and the wind is loud against the shutters is simply someone strong and warm and steadfast standing between us and the cold. That was Thor. And when the thunder rolled far off over the hills and the rain came down and washed the world, the farmers did not tremble as men tremble at an angry God. They were glad, for it meant that he was abroad, out in the wild places, doing his old work, keeping the great cold pushed back one more season, so that the barley might ripen and the children might sleep safe. Let that gladness be in you now as you lie here in the warm. The thunder, if it comes, is only a friend passing by in the dark. He rode out often on such errands, sometimes with Loki beside him, for the two of them were bound together in a strange companionship, the strong one and the clever one. And the tales of the gods are full of their traveling. Loki's wit would find the trouble, and sometimes make it, and Thor's strength would carry them both out the other side. They were not always at ease with each other, and there was always, somewhere beneath, the memory of old mischiefs and the shadow of what Loki would one day become. But on the road, in those long years before the ending, they were companions, and many of Thor's greatest journeys began with the two of them setting out together from the shining hall, the chariot's wheels beginning to turn, the goats leaning into their harness, and the green country of Asgard falling away behind and below as they rose into the gray air and went out toward the edges of the world. Let us follow them there now, out past the wall, into the wild lands, for one of the strangest of all his journeys begins just so, with the two of them traveling east, and evening coming on, and the need, as there always is at evening, for somewhere to shelter for the night. They came, as the light was failing, to a small farmstead at the edge of the wild, a poor and lonely place where a farmer lived with his wife and his two children, a son and a daughter. The son was called Thjalfi, and the daughter Roskva, and they were kind though they had little, and they made the travelers welcome as best they could. But it was plain that there was not enough in the house to feed two great guests, and Thor, who was never one to let his hosts go hungry on his account, did the thing that only he could do. He went out to where his two goats stood in the dusk, and he slaughtered them, and their meat was cooked over the fire, and there was a fine and plentiful supper for them all. And Thor, remembering the old rule, told them all most carefully that they must not break the bones, but throw them, whole and clean, onto the skins that he had laid out upon the floor. And they did so, or thought they did. But the boy Thjalfi, who was young and hungry and did not fully understand, took up one of the thigh bones, and, wanting the sweet marrow inside, split it with his knife, and sucked it out before he laid it on the skin. A small thing, done in innocence, in the way that hunger makes us reach for a little more. and no one saw, and the night passed, and everyone slept warm and full. But in the gray of the morning Thor rose and raised his hammer over the skins and blessed the bones, and the two goats stood up, living and whole as ever, save that one of them limped, dragging a hind leg, lame in the very place where the bone had been split. And Thor saw it, and the pale storm came into his eyes, and for a moment the little house shook with the nearness of his anger, and the poor farmer and his family fell to their knees in terror, certain that he would destroy them all. But here is a thing worth knowing about Thor. His anger came like the storm, sudden and loud, but like the storm it passed, and beneath it he was not cruel. When he saw their fear, and understood it was only a boy's small foolishness and no malice at all, the storm went out of him, and instead of a punishment, he took a payment that was really a gift, for he said that the boy and the girl should come with him, and be his servants and his companions, and travel at his side. And so Thialfi and Roskva joined him, and Thialfi, who could run faster than anyone, became one of the truest of all his followers, and went with him ever after. Sometimes what looks at first like a loss is the door to a long companionship. Remember that, gently, as you drift. So they left the goats behind at the farm to rest and heal, and they went on now on foot, Thor and Loki and the boy and the girl, walking eastward and then out over the gray water and across it, until they came to a vast forest on the far shore, a forest darker and deeper than any they had known, and they walked into it. All that day they walked, and the trees closed over them, and the light grew thin and green and strange, and by the time evening came again, they were deep in the heart of that wood, and very tired, and they began to look about for shelter. And it was then that they came upon the hall. It stood among the trees, an enormous building, its door as wide as the whole end of it, standing open, and within it was empty and dry. And gladly they went inside and lay down to sleep, for it seemed a great mercy to find such a shelter in such a wild place. But in the deep of the night the ground began to shake. A great trembling ran through the earth, and a sound came with it, a low and rolling thunder that was not the thunder of the sky, and the whole hall shuddered around them. They started up in the dark, afraid, and they groped their way deeper into the building, into a smaller room that opened off the side of it. And there they crouched together and waited out the long, uneasy night, listening to that vast rhythmic rumbling that came and went, all around them in the dark. And Thor stood at the doorway of the little room with his hammer ready in his hand, keeping watch over the others, and so the night wore away. When at last the gray morning came, Thor went out to see what manner of thing had shaken the world so, and he found the answer close at hand, and it was so strange and so simple that it might make you smile. There, not far off among the trees, lay an enormous man, a giant so huge that the size of him could hardly be believed, fast asleep upon the ground and snoring. That rolling thunder in the night had been nothing but the breathing of this sleeping giant. And the great hall in which they had sheltered, they now understood, was no hall at all. It was the giant's glove, cast off and lying open on the ground, so vast that 4 travelers had walked into the thumb of it and taken it for a room, and had slept the night in the palm of a mitten. Even the mightiest things, you see, can turn out to be gentle and ordinary when the light comes. There is a kindness in that thought. Hold it a moment. The monster in the dark was only someone sleeping. The giant woke and rose up, tall as a hill against the morning, and he was not unfriendly. He told them his name was Skrymir, which means something like the boaster or the big one, and he gathered up his glove that they had slept in, and he asked if he might travel along with them, for he was going the same way, toward the same place they were bound, a great stronghold in the east. And they agreed, and Skrymir offered to carry all their food together with his own in his great provision sack, and he swung it up onto his shoulder as though it weighed nothing. And off they went, the giant striding ahead with his enormous steps, and the four small travelers hurrying to keep pace behind. All that day they went so, and Skrymir far outpaced them, and when evening came he found a great oak to rest beneath, and he told them he would sleep now, and that they might take the food sack and eat their fill, for he was more tired than hungry. And then he lay down, and was almost at once asleep, and snoring his rolling thunder snore again. But when Thor took up the sack to open it and share out the supper, he could not undo it. The great knot at its mouth would not loosen, however. He pulled and worked at it, for it had been tied by a giant's hands with a giant's strength, and try as he might, he could not get a single strap free, and the four of them stood hungry and thwarted beside the sleeping giant, with all their food locked away just out of reach. And a slow anger rose in Thor at this, and hungry and frustrated as he was, he took his hammer, and he went to where Skrymir lay, and he struck him a blow upon the head. The giant stirred and half woke, and asked mildly whether a leaf had fallen on him from the tree, and had the others eaten their supper yet, and then he rolled over and slept again. And Thor stood there in the dark, holding his hammer and wondering. Twice more in that long night the same thing happened. In the deep dark Thor came again and struck the sleeping giant a mightier blow than before, a blow that he was sure had driven the hammer deep, and Skrymir only stirred and murmured that surely an acorn had dropped on him from the oak above, and was all well, and slept on. And once more, near dawn, Thor gathered all his strength, all the strength in his arms, and his belt, and his heart, and struck the hardest blow he had ever struck at anything, sure that this must be the end of it. And the giant only sat up and rubbed his cheek, and remarked that some bird must have let something fall from the branches, a twig perhaps, and asked whether they were awake, for it was near time to be going on. And so the strange night ended, and Thor did not understand it, and could not understand it, and something in him was uneasy, for he had never before struck 3 such blows at anything, and had it wake and ask about falling leaves. In the morning Skrymir told them that they were near now to the stronghold they sought, a place called Utgard, and that from here their paths would part, for he was going another way. But before he left them, he gave them a piece of counsel, and he gave it kindly, though there was something under it they could not quite read. He told them that when they came to Utgard, they would find the folk there very great, far greater than himself, and that they would do well not to boast among them, not to make too much of themselves, for the men of Utgard would not take kindly to the swagger of small travelers. And then he swung his sack onto his shoulder and turned aside into the forest and was gone, striding away among the trees. And, if the truth be told, none of them were sorry to see the back of him. And they turned their faces toward the east, where now, rising up above the tops of the trees, they could see it, a fortress, a stronghold so tall that they had to bend their necks all the way back to see the top of its walls against the sky. Utgard, the outer stronghold at the very edge of the world of the giants. And toward it they went. The gate of Utgard was barred, and so tall and so strongly made that they could not open it, but the bars were set so wide apart that the four of them simply slipped between them and went in. And so they came into the great hall of the giants, and it was full of them, giants seated along the benches, huge and grim, and at the high seat sat their king, whose name was Utgard Loki, no kin to the Loki who traveled with Thor, but bearing the same name in the way of that country. He looked down at the small travelers who had come into his hall, and he looked them over slowly, and a thin smile came on to his face, and he said, as though it were the most natural thing in the world, that he supposed this little fellow could not be the great Thor that the tale spoke of, for surely the mighty Thor was larger than this. And there was a laughter in his voice that was not kind. But he said they were welcome, as guests are welcome. And then he said, the thing that is the custom of that place, that no one might stay in the hall of Utgard who could not prove themselves better than other men at some skill or feat or craft. And so the contests began. Loki, quick and hungry, spoke first, and said there was no one who could eat faster than he. And Utgard Loki called forth one of his men, whose name was Logi, and had a great trough of meat brought and set down, and Loki was set at one end of it, and Logi at the other. And they began to eat, racing toward the middle. And Loki ate well, faster than any of the gods could have eaten, and he cleaned every scrap of meat from the bones and reached the middle of the trough. But when they looked, Logi at the other end had eaten all the meat and the bones as well, and the very trough it had lain in, and had reached the middle too, so that Loki had lost, though he had eaten as well as any living thing could eat. And there was a murmur among the giants, and Loki fell quiet. Then the boy Thjalfi, who could run faster than anyone alive, offered to race against whomever they chose, and Utgard Loki led them all out to a smooth, flat course, and called forth a small and slight young fellow named Hugi to run against him. And they ran, and Thjalfi ran as swift as the wind, swifter than any mortal ever ran. But Hugi ran so much swifter that he reached the end of the course and turned and came back to meet Thjalfi, while Thjalfi was still running out. They raced again and again, and each time the boy was beaten by a greater and greater distance, though he ran his very heart out. And at last he had to yield, for no matter how he strained, that slight, quick figure was always at the goal, and turning back before he had run half the way. And Thjalfi, who had never been beaten, stood breathing hard and could not understand it. Then it was Thor's turn, and Utgard Loki asked him what feat he would show them, and Thor, who was thirsty from the road, said that he would drink, that he would drain any cup they set before him. And so a great drinking horn was brought, long and curving, and Utgard Loki said, with that thin smile, that a good drinker would empty it in one draught, that a fair drinker would take two, but that no one was so poor a drinker that he could not finish it in three. And Thor looked at the horn, and it did not seem so very large, though it was long, and he was very thirsty. And he set it to his lips, and drank, deep and long, a great swallowing draught, that he was sure must empty it or near enough. But when he lifted his head and looked, The horn was scarcely lower than before, barely a difference to be seen. So he drew a breath and set to again, and drank even longer and deeper than the first time, until his breath gave out. And still, when he looked, though the level had gone down a little, the horn was very far from empty, and could still be carried without spilling. A third time he drank with all his might, longer than either time before, until he could drink no more. And when he set the horn down at last, and looked into it, the drink had gone down only a little way, only enough to be lifted and carried, and no more. And Thor was ashamed, and put the horn from him, and said he would drink no more, and the giants looked at one another. Then Utgard Loki said, still smiling, that it seemed Thor was not so mighty as the tales made him, and perhaps he would like to try a smaller thing, a thing they set their children to as a game. He said that his people had a gray cat about the hall, and that the young ones amused themselves by lifting it from the floor, and that perhaps Thor might try to lift the cat. And a great gray cat came walking across the floor, and Thor bent to it and put his hands beneath it and lifted. And the cat arched its back and rose with his lifting up and up, and however much he strained and heaved, the cat only arched higher, its back curving up toward the roof of the hall, and its feet stayed upon the ground. He put out all his strength, all the great strength that could shatter stone, and he managed at the very last, with everything he had, to lift a single one of the cat's 4 paws a little way off the floor. And that was all. And Utgard Loki said mildly that he had thought as much, that the cat was large, and Thor was small, and there was no shame in it, but it was not a mighty thing. By now the pale storm was rising in Thor's eyes, for he had been shamed 3 times over in the hall of the giants, and he said in a low voice that small as they might think him, they should let someone come and wrestle him, for now he was angry. And Utgard Loki looked about the hall, as though none of his men would think it worth their while to wrestle so small a fellow. And then he said that perhaps the only fair match would be to call for his old foster mother, an ancient woman named Elli, for Thor might wrestle her, since she had thrown men in her day who looked stronger than he. And there came into the hall an old woman, bent and gray and withered, and Thor was loath to lay hands on so old a creature, but she came at him, and he took hold of her, and he found that the harder he gripped, the firmer she stood. She was old, and she was small, and she was a woman full of years, and yet he could not move her, not an inch, and slowly, terribly, she began to move him. He set his feet and pulled with all his might, and she bore him back and back, and though he fought her with everything that was in him, in the end she brought him down onto one knee, and there she held him and could not be thrown. And Utgard Loki called the match to a stop and said that was enough, that Thor need wrestle no more, for it was plain how it would go, and that night was falling now, and they should all rest. So the 4 travelers were given good places in the hall that night, and were treated well, and fed and lodged as honored guests, and they slept. But it was a heavy sleep for Thor, for he had come into the land of the giants meaning to show his strength, and instead he had been beaten at every turn, out-eaten, outrun, unable to empty a horn or lift a cat or throw an old woman. And he did not understand how it could be, he who had held the whole of Asgard safe on the strength of his 2 arms. And he lay in that strange hall in the dark, and turned it over and over, and could find no answer. And at last he slept, uneasy, until the morning. In the morning they rose and made ready to go, and Utgard Loki himself, courteous now, walked with them out of the hall and out through the gate and a little way along their road, as a good host sees his guests off from his door. And when they had come outside the walls and stood in the open country in the light of the new day, the giant king turned to Thor, and his face was different now, quieter, almost gentle, and he asked Thor how he thought his journey had gone, and whether he had ever met a mightier man than himself. And Thor, honest even in his shame, said that he could not deny he had come off badly, and that it grieved him, and that he knew the folk of Utgard would call him a small thing now. And then Utgard Loki told him the truth, and it changed everything that had gone before. He told Thor that now they were out of the stronghold, and if he had his way, Thor would never enter it again, that he would confess to him what had really happened. For the truth was that he had deceived Thor with illusions from the very first, and that Thor had never once been truly beaten, but had done such deeds as filled the giants with terror. He was the giant, he said, whom they had met in the forest, the one called Skrymir, and it was he who had tied the food sack with wire so cunningly knotted that no hand could loose it, so that they went hungry. And those 3 great hammer blows in the night, the blows Thor had struck at the sleeping head and thought had come to nothing, those had not fallen on his head at all. He had slipped a mountain between himself and the hammer in the dark, and it was the mountain that had taken the blows. And if Thor cared to look, he would find in that far hill 3 great square valleys driven deep into the rock, for those were the marks of the 3 strokes, and had they landed as they were aimed, they would have been the death of him. Thor's strength had never failed. It had only been turned aside by illusion. And the contests in the hall had been the same, every one of them a trick of the eye and the mind. When Loki raced to eat the meat, the one called Logi who outate him was not a man at all, but wildfire itself, given a shape, and fire eats meat and bone and wood and all, so that no living creature could ever hope to match it. When Thialfi ran and could not win, the slight, swift figure named Hugi, who beat him, was thought itself, given a shape, and nothing that runs on legs can outrun thought, so that the boy had run more marvelously than the giant king had believed any creature could, and had come nearer to matching thought than seemed possible. And the horn that Thor could not empty, though he drank 3 mighty draughts, the far end of that horn had been joined to the sea, to the whole of the great ocean itself, so that he had been drinking down the sea and could not know it. And when they came at last to the shore, they would find that the tides had sunk, that Thor's drinking had drawn the ocean down, and men would call it the ebb of the tide ever after. And the great gray cat that he could not lift, that had not been a cat at all, but the great serpent that lies coiled around the whole of the world, the Midgard serpent, holding its own tail in the deep of the sea. And when Thor lifted it until only one paw stayed upon the ground, he had very nearly drawn the whole world's serpent up out of the sea, and the giants had watched in dread, for they had not thought such a thing was possible. And the old woman, Elli, the ancient bent grandmother, whom Thor could not throw, and who brought him at last down onto one knee. She was old age herself, given a shape, and there has never lived, and there will never live, any creature so strong that old age does not bring it down in the end, so that even to go down slowly onto only one knee and no further was a wonder the like of which had never been seen. And so Thor understood at last that he had not been shamed at all, but had done deeds so great that the giants had hidden them behind illusions out of fear of him, and that all their tricks had been not to mock his weakness, but to guard against a strength they could not otherwise have withstood. And a great gladness and a great anger rose in him together, and he reached for his hammer, meaning to repay the deception. But when he looked, Utgard Loki was gone, and the great stronghold of Utgard was gone too, and where the tall walls had stood, there was only the open country, wide and empty and green, under the morning sky, with nothing there at all. For the whole of it had been a work of illusion and old magic, raised up to test him, and now folded away like a dream at waking. And Thor stood in the empty field with his companions, and there was no one to strike. And after a while the anger went out of him, as his anger always did, and what was left was a kind of wonder. He had wrestled with fire, and with thought, and with the sea, and with the world serpent, and with old age itself, and none of them had truly beaten him. And with that thought turning quietly in him, he gathered his companions and turned his face toward home, and they began the long road back to Asgard. Let that be a soft thought to rest on. The things that seemed to defeat him had only hidden how strong he truly was. It was a long road home, back over the gray water and through the deep forest and across the wild lands. And I like to think of it as a quiet road, an easy one, the trouble all behind them now, and only the way home before them. They would have gone slowly, in no great hurry, the boy Thialfi running ahead and doubling back the way young ones do, the giant land falling away behind them mile by mile, and the green country of the gods drawing nearer with each day. And at last, one evening, they would have come again to the Rainbow Bridge, and crossed it, and passed the watchman at the gate, and come home into Asgard, home to the far shining hall, home to the fire and the feast and the golden light and the rest that waits at the end of every long journey. For that is the shape of all Thor's tales, when you stand back and look at them, out into the cold and the wild and the strange, and then home again to the warmth, out and home, like breathing, like the tide. And you, too, are on your way home now, in your own way, home into sleep, home into the warm dark, and all you have to do is let the road carry you. Now that great serpent that lay coiled around the world, the one Thor had almost lifted from the sea in the shape of a cat, was no small thing in the reckoning of the gods, and it is time to tell of it properly, for it belongs to Thor's story more deeply than any other creature, and their two fates are bound together from the beginning to the very end. It was called Jormungand, the Midgard serpent, and it was one of the children of Loki, born in the shadowed years. And when it was young, the gods had cast it out into the great sea that encircles the world of men. And there, in the deep water, it had grown, and never stopped growing, until at last it was so vast that it wound all the way around the whole of the world, and could take its own tail into its mouth. And so it lay, a ring of serpent around everything, sleeping in the cold and the dark at the bottom of the sea. And Thor and the serpent were, in some old and unspoken way, meant for each other, the guardian and the thing that circled all he guarded. And though neither had yet met the other face to face, there was a reckoning waiting for them out on the gray water. It came about like this. Thor set out once in the guise of a young traveler and came to the hall of a giant named Hymir, who lived far out by the edge of the outer sea, a cold and grim old giant who kept a great household and many cattle. And there, for reasons of his own, Thor stayed as a guest, and when the morning came, the giant made ready to go out fishing, for that was his custom, to row out onto the deep water and bring back fish for the hall. And Thor asked if he might come along and row with him. And the old giant looked at the young stranger and scoffed, and said that a little fellow like this would be no use on the water, and would only sit shivering and be a burden, and that besides he meant to row so far out and stay so long that his guest would freeze. But Thor pressed him, and in the end the giant grumbled and let him come, and told him he had better find his own bait if he meant to fish. And so Thor went to where the giant's cattle stood, the great herd of the giant's oxen, and he chose the largest and finest of them all, a huge black ox, and he took the whole head of it for his bait, and carried it down to the boat. And the giant watched him and said nothing, though his face was dark. They pushed off, and they rowed out onto the gray sea, and Thor took the oars and pulled, and the boat leapt forward under his strength, and they went out fast and far. The giant fished at his usual grounds where he was used to fishing, and there he pulled up 2 whales, one after the other, and thought that a fine catch, and was ready to turn back. But Thor said they should go further out, and he bent to the oars again and rowed on, out past the giant's grounds, out over deeper and deeper water, until the giant grew uneasy, and said they were come now to dangerous places, out where the Midgard serpent lay, and that they should go no further. But Thor rowed on a little more, and then he shipped the oars, and he made ready a great strong line and a mighty hook, and he baited the hook with the black ox head, and he cast it down into the deep, and let it sink and sink, all the way to the cold floor of the world, where the serpent lay, coiled in the dark. Let your breath stay slow here. There is nothing to fear in this water. It is only a story, and you are warm and far away. And far below, in the dark, the serpent found the ox head and took the hook, and the line drew tight. And what followed was the greatest struggle of Thor's long life on the water, though I will tell it to you softly, for it is far away and long ago, and needs to trouble your rest not at all. The serpent, feeling the hook, thrashed and pulled, a pull so vast that it might have dragged the little boat down under the sea. But Thor braced himself and held, and set his feet against the bottom of the boat, and heaved, and such was his strength and his fury, that his feet went straight through the planks of the boat, and down onto the seabed itself, so that he stood upon the very floor of the ocean, and pulled from there. And slowly, terribly, hand over hand, he drew the serpent up. Up out of the deep it came, the great coils rising, the water pouring off it, until at last its enormous head broke the surface. And for one long moment, the guardian of the world and the serpent that circled it looked upon each other, face to face, across the heaving gray water for the first time. And it was a moment out of the oldest dream of the North, the thunder god with his line drawn taut and his eyes blazing, and the world's serpent risen from the deep, glaring back, and all the sea around them running wild. And Thor reached for his hammer to make an end of it there and then, out on the water at the edge of the world. But the old giant Hymir, in the other end of the boat, was seized with terror at the sight of that vast head risen out of the sea, and at the thought of what would happen if the serpent were hauled fully aboard, and in his fear, before Thor could strike, he snatched up his knife and cut the line. And the great serpent, freed, sank back down into the deep, down and down, away into the dark water where it had lain before, and the sea closed over it, and it was gone. And Thor, in his anger, flung his hammer after it across the waves, and some say the hammer struck the serpent's head a glancing blow before it sank. But the serpent was not slain, only wounded, and it went down into the depths to nurse its hurt and its long memory, and to wait. For their reckoning was not meant to come here, not yet, not on this gray morning at the edge of the world. It was set for another day, far off at the very end of all things. And both of them, somehow, seemed to know it. And so the serpent sank, and the sea grew calm, and the moment passed, and they rowed back to shore, the giant shaken and silent, and Thor quiet too, looking back once at the smooth gray water that had closed over the thing he had almost slain, and knowing, without being told, that he had not seen the last of it. But that was for another age, for now there was the shore and the fire and the ordinary warmth of coming in from the cold water, and we may leave them there and let the sea go still. And is there anything, I wonder, as good as that, as coming in warm from the cold at the end of a long gray day on the water? Picture it softly, the boat drawn up on the shingle, the wet ropes coiled, the walk up from the shore with the wind at your back now instead of your face, and then the door and the fire within, and the warmth coming into your cold hands, slow and sweet, and the long ache of the day beginning to loosen and let go. That is where we leave Thor after his day upon the deep water, not out on the wild sea at all, but home, or somewhere like home, by a fire, the cold going out of him, the great serpent sunk far away and half forgotten, his hands warming, his eyes growing heavy in the firelight. And perhaps that is the truest picture of him in all the tales, not the one with the hammer raised, but this quieter one, the guardian at rest, the long day done, warm at last, and beginning, like you, to drift towards sleep. Let the sea go still. Let the fire burn low. Let it all grow quiet and warm and far away. There is a lighter tale to tell now, and a gentler one, and it will make you smile as it carries you further down towards sleep. For not all of Thor's trials were struggles on the gray sea, and this one is more like a comedy than a battle, though a great deal hangs upon it. It begins on a morning when Thor woke and reached, as he always reached, for his hammer, and found that it was not there. He searched, and it was nowhere. Mjolnir, the guardian of Asgard, the thing that kept the giants at bay, was gone, stolen in the night, and no one knew where. And you can imagine the fear that went through the halls of the gods at this, for without the hammer, the wall of the world stood open, and the frost and the cold could come pressing in whenever they chose. Thor's beard shook with the anger and the alarm of it, and he went straight to Loki, and the two of them set about finding where the hammer had gone. Loki borrowed a cloak of feathers from the goddess Freya, a cloak that let its wearer fly like a bird, and he put it on and rose up into the air and flew out from Asgard, over the wall and across the empty spaces into the land of the giants, to see what he could learn. And there he found the answer, for seated upon a green mound, plaiting golden collars for his hounds and combing the manes of his horses, altogether pleased with himself, was a giant king named Thrym. And Thrym, when Loki asked him, made no secret of it. Yes, he said, he had taken Thor's hammer, and he had hidden it away deep beneath the earth, 8 leagues down, where no one would ever find it. And no one would ever get it back, he said, no one at all, unless the gods would give him, in exchange for it, the goddess Freya, the fairest of them all, to be his wife. That was his price, the hammer for the bride. And with that he sent Loki flying back to Asgard with his demand. Now Freya, when she heard that she was to be handed over to a giant, was not at all willing, and her anger was so great that the halls shook with it, and she said plainly that she would not go, not for anything, and the gods could not make her. And so the gods gathered in council to think what might be done, for they must have the hammer back, and yet they could not send Freya, and it seemed there was no way through. And it was then that the wise god Heimdall, who could see far and think clearly, spoke up with a plan. And it was a plan so strange and so bold that it must have brought a startled laugh even to that anxious gathering. Let Thor himself, he said, be dressed as the bride. Let them put the wedding linen on him, and the veil over his face, and the bridal jewels about his neck, and the great necklace of Freya upon his breast, and let him go to the land of the giants in Freya's place, and so come near enough to the hammer to take it back. And Thor, when he heard this, wanted nothing to do with it, for it seemed to him a shameful thing to be dressed as a woman and a bride, and he said the gods would mock him ever after. But Loki, quick as ever, told him that if the hammer stayed lost, then it was not mockery he need fear, but the giants themselves marching into Asgard to live in the halls of the gods, and that this was no time for pride. And so, grumbling and with the storm in his eyes, Thor submitted, and they dressed him. They put the long bridal gown upon him, and hung the keys of a housewife at his waist, and set brooches upon his breast, and drew a fine veil down over his face, and about his neck they fastened the great shining necklace, and they braided his hair and set the bridal crown upon it. And Loki, laughing, said that he would go along too, dressed as the bride's serving maid, so that there would be someone with a quick tongue to smooth over any trouble. And so the two of them, the great thunder god veiled as a bride, and the trickster as her maid, climbed into the chariot, and the goats were harnessed, and off they went across the sky toward the land of the giants, the mountains cracking and the earth trembling beneath the fury of that ride. So eager was Thor to be about it and have it done. When Thrym saw that his bride was coming, he was full of joy, and he called out to his people to make everything ready, to strew the benches with straw and lay out the feast, for Freya herself was coming to be his wife, and he counted himself the richest and most fortunate of all the giants. And so a great wedding feast was spread in the hall of Thrym, and the veiled bride was led in and seated in the place of honor, with her maid beside her, and the eating and the drinking began. But here the plan very nearly came undone, for Thor was hungry from the long ride and forgot himself, and beneath that modest veil he ate as Thor ate, which is to say, enormously, a whole ox to himself, and 8 whole salmon, and all the dainties that had been set out for the women, and he washed it down with 3 great casks of mead. And Thrym stared at this, astonished, and said he had never in his life seen a bride with such an appetite, never seen a woman eat so much or drink so deep. But Loki, quick as ever in his serving maid's dress, leaned in and said softly that it was no wonder, for the fair Freya had been so wild with longing to come to Thrym and to the land of the giants that she had eaten nothing at all for 8 long nights. So great was her eagerness, and that was why she fell upon the feast so hungrily now. And Thrym was delighted with this answer, and his heart softened all the more toward his bride. And so the giant, full of love, bent forward and lifted a corner of the veil, meaning to kiss his bride, and he found himself looking into 2 eyes that burned back at him, pale and terrible as coals of fire. And he started back the whole length of the hall in fright, and cried out that the bride's eyes were dreadful, that they blazed as though with fire. But again the quick maid at her side had an answer ready, and said gently that it was no wonder, for the fair Freya had not slept at all for 8 long nights. So wild had been her longing to come to the giant's hall, and that was why her eyes burned so. And Thrym was satisfied once more, and altogether charmed. And now, being wholly won over, he called for the thing that would seal the marriage, the thing that was the custom of that place. He called for the hammer to be brought in, for Mjolnir to be laid upon the bride's knees, so that the wedding might be hallowed and made binding under its blessing. And there it was. The hammer was carried in and laid down upon the lap of the veiled bride. And the moment the great weight of it settled into his hands, Thor knew it, and his heart laughed within him, and the long game was won. He rose up then and cast off the veil, and took the hammer in his grip, and it was Thor once more, no bride at all, but the thunder god with his weapon, come home to his hand at last. And I will pass over lightly, as you drift, what came after, for there was a reckoning with Thrym and his household for the theft. And Thor set right what had been done, and won back the peace of Asgard. And the wall of the world stood whole again, with the hammer back where it belonged. But the heart of the tale is not in that. The heart of it is in the picture of the great strong god, so full of dignity, brought to sit, veiled and jeweled at a giant's feast, eating an ox behind his modest veil, and winning back the guardian of all the gods, not by force at all, but by a clever disguise, and a maid's quick tongue. And when they came home to Asgard, Hammer regained, I think even Thor, whose pride had been so sore about it, must have come in time to laugh at the strangeness of it, and to be glad. And so that lighter tale comes to its close, and the hammer is safe, and all is well, and you may let it carry you a little further down toward the soft dark of sleep. Think how it must have been in Asgard that night the hammer came home. The fear gone now, the wall of the world's whole again, the giants pushed back once more beyond the edge of things. The fires lit high in the far shining hall, and the gods gathered close in the warm gold light, and Thor among them, out of his borrowed finery now and back in his own plain strength, the great weight of the hammer easy again at his side. There would have been feasting, and the low murmur of voices, and someone telling over the strange tale of the veiled bride and the maid's quick tongue, and laughter going round the benches, soft and warm and easy, the good tired laughter of danger safely past. And outside, the night and the watchman at the gate, and the stars turning slow over the sleeping worlds, and everything, for a while, at peace. Rest in that peace a moment. The danger is past. The hammer is home. The hall is warm, and the night is kind, and there is nothing at all now that you need to do but breathe and let go and drift. There is one more of Thor's great deeds to tell before we come to the ending, and it is the tale of the strongest of all the giants he ever faced, a giant of stone named Hrungnir, and though it is a tale of a duel, I will tell it softly, in the low mythic register of a thing seen from very far away, so that it may sit gently in you and never once disturb your rest. It began, as troubles often did, while Thor was away in the east about his usual work, off among the wild lands, doing what he did, and the other gods were at home. And it happened that the chief of the gods, Odin, riding his 8-legged horse, came upon Hrungnir in the land of the giants, and there fell out between them a boast about whose horse was the swifter, and a race and a chase. And in the heat of it, Hrungnir rode his own great horse right in through the gates of Asgard before he well knew where he was, and found himself a guest of a kind in the hall of the gods. Now the gods, being courteous even to an uninvited giant, offered him drink, and Hrungnir drank, and drank deeply, and the drink went to his head, and he grew loud and boastful and troublesome, as a giant will, and began to say wild things, that he would lift up the whole hall of the gods and carry it away to the land of the giants, that he would sink Asgard beneath the sea, that he would carry off 2 of the goddesses for himself, and drink up all the gods' ale besides. And they let him rave, and grew weary of him, and at last, wanting to be rid of the boasting, they spoke the name of Thor. And no sooner was the name spoken than Thor himself came striding into the hall, home from the east, his hammer raised, the pale storm in his eyes, demanding to know who had let a giant sit drinking in the halls of the gods, and why this stone giant was making free with the ale and eyeing the goddesses. But Hrungnir, drunk as he was no coward, and he answered that he had come there under the protection of Odin's own invitation, as a guest, and that it would be no great glory for Thor to strike down an unarmed giant who had come in peace and left his weapons at home. If Thor wanted honor, said Hrungnir, let him meet him properly at the border between their lands, in a fair duel, each with his weapons, and let it be settled that way. And this was a fair challenge, and could not be refused without shame. And so Thor agreed to it, and Hrungnir went home to the land of the giants to make ready. And it is said that this was the first time anyone had ever challenged Thor to a set duel, and that a great deal of interest and a great deal of fear went through the land of the giants at the news, for on Hrungnir, their strongest, much seemed to hang. The giants, wanting their champion to be terrible enough for the task, made him a helper to stand beside him, a great figure molded out of clay, enormous, taller than any hill, and into this clay man they set the heart of a mare to give it life, though it was a timid heart, and the clay giant, for all his size, would prove more given to trembling than to fighting. And Hrungnir himself was a fearsome sight, for he was made all of stone, and his head was of hard stone, and his heart within him was a heart of stone, sharp and 3-cornered, and he carried a great shield of stone, and, for his weapon, a whetstone, a huge grinding stone that he bore upon his shoulder, ready to hurl. And so he stood at the appointed place, at the border, with his stone shield before him, and his whetstone ready, and the vast clay giant quaking at his side, and waited for Thor to come. And Thor came, but not alone, for his servant Thialfi ran on ahead, swift as ever, and by a cleverness told Hrungnir that he had best not stand with his shield before him, for Thor, he said, would come at him from below, up through the earth itself. And Hrungnir, believing it, laid his great stone shield down upon the ground, and stood upon it to guard himself from below, and took his whetstone up in both hands. And that was his undoing, for Thor did not come from below at all. He came in the true shape of the thunder, with a great roaring and a flashing of lightning, and while he was still far off, he hurled his hammer through the air. And Hrungnir, seeing it come, flung his own whetstone to meet it, and the two great stones met in the air between them with a crash that split the sky, and the whetstone shattered, and pieces of it flew everywhere, and one splinter of it flew into Thor's own head, so that he fell. But the hammer flew on through the broken stone, and struck Hrungnir full upon his head of stone, and shattered it, and the great stone giant fell forward, all his vast weight coming down, and he fell across Thor where Thor had fallen, so that one of the giant's huge stone legs lay over Thor's neck, pinning him to the ground. And as for the great clay giant with the mare's heart, he had trembled so at the coming of the thunder that he was easily overthrown, and made no true fight at all. So the duel was won, and the strongest of the giants was fallen. But there was Thor, pinned under the dead giant's leg, unable to rise, with the splinter of whetstone lodged in his head. And none of the gods who came could lift the great stone leg away, until at last Thor's own young son, a child named Magni, only 3 nights old and yet already grown huge and strong beyond his years, came and lifted the giant's leg from his father's neck as though it were nothing, and freed him, and said that had he come sooner, he would have dealt with the giant with his bare fist. And Thor was proud of the boy, and gave him the giant's swift horse for a reward. As for the splinter of stone lodged in Thor's head, that was a harder trouble, and a wise woman was called, a seeress named Groa, and she sang her charms over him to loosen the stone and draw it out, and the stone began to work loose under her singing. But the tale of that has a soft and rambling ending, for Thor, grateful and meaning kindness, told the wise woman a piece of good news he thought would gladden her about her lost husband, and she was so overjoyed at the news that she forgot her charms entirely, and lost the thread of her singing. And so the stone was never fully drawn out, but stayed lodged in Thor's head ever after. And that, the old people said, was why one must never throw a whetstone across the floor of a room, for when a whetstone is thrown, the stone in Thor's head stirs, and he feels it. A small and homely ending to a great duel, the strongest of giants fallen, and the god left with a splinter of stone in his brow, and a story to explain a small superstition. And so the old tales wound the great and the small together, and made the whole world feel like one house. And so the years of Thor went on, season upon season, in the long, bright afternoon of the gods. And there were more journeys than anyone telling could hold, more crossings of the gray water, more nights in strange halls, more meetings with giants at the edges of the world. He went east, and he came home, and went east again, and the hammer rose, and the frost drew back, and the barley ripened in the fields of men, and the children slept safe under the passing thunder. Picture, if it soothes you, the great slow rhythm of it, the going out and the coming home, the way a life falls into a rhythm like breathing, like the tide that Thor once drank down, and that has risen and fallen ever since, He would come home to the far shining hall, to Sif of the golden hair, and the fires would be lit, and the goats would be resting in the grass, whole and living, and there would be feasting and the warmth of the hearth and the ease of being home from the cold. And then some new trouble would call, some new giant grow too bold, and out he would go again, and so the years turned. There is a thing worth saying softly here before we come to the ending, and it is this, that the gods of the north, unlike the gods of some other lands, always knew that their long bright afternoon would come to an end. It was not hidden from them. They knew from the oldest of the wise sayings and the deepest of the prophecies that a day was coming, far off but certain, when the long struggle would come at last to its close, when the frost and the fire and all the old enemies would rise together, and the gods would go out to meet them one final time, and that on that day many things that had stood since the beginning of the world would fall. They called that day Ragnarok, the fate of the gods, the twilight of all the shining ones. And they did not spend their years weeping over it, nor did they try to flee it, for it could not be fled. They lived their long afternoon in the full knowledge of the evening that was coming, and they feasted and journeyed and loved and fought all the more warmly for knowing it, the way a day is most golden and most tender in its last hours, when the light comes low and slantwise and turns everything it touches to gold. And there is something in that, I think, that is worth carrying down with you into sleep. That a thing can be precious because it ends. That the knowing of the ending need not spoil the day, but may sweeten it. Let your breath slow now. Let it grow long and easy. For we have come, in this last of the tale, to the far edge of the world's long afternoon, and the light is beginning, very gently, to fail. The old tellings say that before the ending there would come signs, and that the world would know in its bones that the twilight was near. First, there would come a great and terrible winter, a winter such as had never been, 3 winters together with no summer between them, the snow driving in from every quarter of the sky, and the cold pressing down and the sun giving no warmth. And this long dark cold was called the mighty winter, the Fimbul winter, and it would lie upon the world like a heavy sleep. And in that long dark the stars would loosen from their places, and the sun and the moon that had always been pursued across the sky would at last be overtaken and swallowed, and the light would go out of the heavens, and there would be only the dark and the cold and the falling snow. But I tell you this softly, and from very far away, for it is only the oldest of dreams, and you are warm, and the night around you is a kind one, and the darkness that is coming for you now is only the soft darkness of sleep, which is a mercy and not a sorrow. And in that darkening time the old bonds would loosen, and the things that had long been bound would come free, and all the powers of the frost and the fire and the deep would gather themselves at last and turn toward the home of the gods. From the cold north they would come, and from the burning south over the trembling bridge and across the wide plains, a great gathering of all the old enemies moving together toward Asgard under the failing sky, and the watchman of the gods, Heimdall, who had kept the bridge since the beginning of the world, would lift the great horn to his lips and blow, one long note ringing out across all the 9 worlds, the note that all the ages had waited for, calling the gods to wake and rise and arm and come out, for the last of the days had come. And the gods would hear it, and they would rise, every one of them, and go out through the gates of Asgard to meet the ending on the wide plain, as they had always known they would, without flinching, in the gray last light. Let your breath stay slow. There is no fear in this. It is only the old story coming softly to its rest. And each of the gods, the telling say, had an appointed meeting on that field, a fate that had been set for them since the beginning, one enemy that was theirs and theirs alone, to face at the ending of the world. Odin, the wise and the wandering, the eldest of them, had his. The bright god Frey had his, and Thor, the guardian, the thunder, the one who had stood so long at the wall of the worlds, he had his too, and his was the one you already know, the one that had been waiting for him out on the gray water since the morning he had almost drawn it up on his line, and the giant had cut the rope. For up out of the sea in that last of the days would rise the great serpent that circled the world, Jormungand, uncoiling at long last from around the edges of everything, thrashing its way up out of the deep and coming ashore, the very sea heaving and pouring off its vast rising coils. And it would come toward the plain, breathing out its cold poison over the air and the water, darkening the sky. And there, at last, after all the long ages, Thor and the world serpent would come face to face for the final time. The guardian and the thing that had circled all he guarded, the two whose fates had been braided together from the very beginning, meeting now where the tale had always been leading them, at the ending of the world. And I will tell you the meeting of them softly as anything in all this long night, for it is the close of the whole tale, and it does not need to trouble your rest, only to carry you down into it. They met upon that gray plain under the failing sky, the thunder god and the world serpent. And it was not like the loud struggles of the middle years, not a thing of noise and fury, but slow now, and vast, and strangely quiet, the way the greatest things are quiet, the way a mountain is quiet, even as it moves. Thor raised his hammer one last time, the hammer the dwarves had made in the dark under the world, the hammer that had guarded the wall of the worlds for all the long ages. And he brought it against the serpent, and the serpent bowed down before that last great blow, and its long circling of the world was ended, and it fell. The guardian had done, at the very last, the thing he had been made to do. He had stood between the world and the thing that would have unmade it, and he had not stepped aside. But the serpent, in its falling, breathed out over him its cold breath, all the poison it had gathered through the long ages in the deep, and it washed over Thor where he stood. And he turned, having done what he came to do, and he walked away from the fallen serpent, 9 steps, only 9, slow steps across the gray ground. And then the old thunder god, the friend of farmers and fishermen and travelers on the road, the one who had stood so long in the doorway of the world, lay himself down upon the earth. And that was the ending of Thor. And I tell it to you gently and without sorrow, for there is no sorrow in it, only rest, only a great and weary guardian lying down at last after the longest of watches, his work all finished, his long labor done, laying himself down upon the earth he had kept safe for so long, and closing his eyes. He had earned his rest, and he took it. And all across that gray plain, in the last of the light, the others took their rest as well, each god and each old enemy, meeting the fate that had been theirs from the beginning, the wise and the bright and the strong, all lying down together as the light went out of the sky, and the old world folded itself away. And the sea rose up soft and gray and covered the land, and the fires sank, and the long dark came down over everything, gentle as a blanket drawn up over a sleeping child. And the whole of the old world sank down at last into a deep and dreamless quiet, into stillness, into sleep. And it was not an ending of grief. It was only an ending, only the day at last laying itself down into the night. And yet the old tellings do not leave the story there in the dark and the quiet. And neither will we, for the wise ones of the north believe something gentle and hopeful about that long night, something worth carrying with you as you drift. And it is this, that the darkness after the ending was not the true end of all things, but only a resting, only a deep sleep of the world, and that out of it, in time, something new and green would rise. For after the sea had covered everything, and the long dark had lain over the world, slowly, softly, the tellings say, the waters would sink again, and the earth would rise up once more out of the sea, new and clean and green, greener than it had ever been, with fields that no one had sown, bearing grain of their own accord, and rivers running clear, and the morning coming up over a world washed new. It is a gentle picture and a kind one, and it is the last gift the old story gives to those who listen, that even the deepest night is followed by a morning, that even the ending of a world is only the turning of it toward a new beginning. The way your own sleep tonight is only the turning of your day toward tomorrow. And in that new green morning, the tellings say, not everything was lost, for some things came through the long night and rose again into the light. A few of the gods, the younger ones, woke as if from a long sleep and walked out into the new-made fields, and found there in the fresh grass the old golden game pieces that the gods had played with in the world before, lying scattered and shining in the dew, and they gathered them up and remembered and were glad. And out of the great world tree, which had swayed but had not fallen, there came a man and a woman who had sheltered deep within it through all the long dark, kept safe in its heart as you are kept safe now in the heart of the night. And they came out into the new morning and looked upon the new world, and from them the world of men would be made again, and filled again with warmth and voices and small warm lives beginning. And so the whole great wheel would turn once more, gentle and unhurried, from dark to light, from sleep to waking, from ending to beginning, as it always had and always would. And here is the last and softest thing, the thing that belongs most of all to Thor, and that I have kept for the very end to lay quietly in your heart as you go down toward sleep. The tellings say that Thor's own sons came through the long night alive, the two of them, Magni and Modi, the strong one and the brave one, the boy who had lifted the giant's leg from his father's neck, and his brother, and that they walked out together into the new green morning of the reborn world. And they carried between them, out of the old world and into the new, the hammer, Mjolnir, the guardian of all the worlds, come whole and shining through the long dark, so that even after the great ending, even after the guardian himself had lain down to rest, the thing he had carried, the protection he had been, did not pass out of the world, but went on into the new morning, into the hands of his children, to guard the new-made world as it had guarded the old. And I think there is no more peaceful thought in all the long tale than that one, and no better one to fall asleep upon. that what is good and warm and protecting does not truly end, but is carried forward out of every darkness and into every new morning, from hand to hand, from age to age, gentle and unbroken, on and on. So that is the whole life of Thor, from the making of his hammer in the dark under the world to the laying down of it at the ending. And it's carrying on into the morning after. And now, as the night deepens around you, let us not rush away from it, but linger a little while longer in the warmth of that old world, the way you might sit on a while by the embers of a fire after the story is told, in no hurry to rise, letting the picture settle and grow soft and dim. For there is no more that needs to happen now. The tale is told. There is nothing to do but listen and breathe and let go. Think again, gently, of the far shining hall, of Bilskirnir with its many pillars and its warm hearths, the largest of all the houses of the gods, its windows glowing gold in the blue of the evening, the smoke rising slow and straight into a still sky. Think of the door standing open, and the light spilling out onto the grass, and the warmth within, and the room always for one more. Think of the two great shaggy goats standing patient in the meadow, with their long eyes half closed, breathing slow in the cool air, resting whole and well, ready to run again when the morning comes. Think of Sif of the golden hair, her hair made new and shining, sitting by the fire in the warm light. It is a good place, that hall. It is the kind of place the old people dreamed of when the winter wind was loud against the shutters and the night was long. A warm room, a bright fire, a strong friend in the doorway, and nothing outside that could reach you. Let yourself be there now, in that warm hall, in the last soft glow of the fire. You are safe here. There is nothing outside that can reach you. There is nothing you need to do. And think, if you like, one last gentle time, of what Thor meant to the ones who told his story, those farmers and fishermen and travelers of the cold north so long ago. They did not ask him for cleverness, or for riches, or for the secrets of the world. They asked him simply to stand between them and the dark, to keep the frost from the door, to hold back the cold one more season, so the barley might ripen and the children might sleep. And when the thunder rolled far off over the hills in the summer dusk, they were not afraid. They were glad, for it meant he was out there in the wild places, doing his old and faithful work, keeping the great cold pushed back, keeping the small warm lights of home burning a little longer. And that same old gladness can be yours tonight, that there is something steadfast in the world, that the dark has always been held back, season upon season, age upon age, that the warmth goes on, that you can let go of the day and let go of your watching and rest, because the long watch does not depend on you tonight and never did. Someone is standing in the doorway. You may sleep. And if any of the pictures of this long night wish to drift back through your mind as you sink towards sleep, let them come softly, without weight, the way images come at the edge of a dream, half seen and then gone. Let them rise and fade as they please. There is the dark under the world, and the red glow of the dwarves' forges, and the small, patient hammers ringing on the anvil, and the hammer taking shape in the fire. There is the long road east, and the evening coming on, and the little farmstead at the edge of the wild, and the fire, and the supper shared, and the goats standing whole again in the gray morning. There is the great glove in the forest that they took for a hall, and the giant sleeping under the oak, and the discovery in the light that the monster in the dark was only someone resting. Let them come and go. You do not have to hold any of them. There is the strange, tall stronghold of Utgard, folding away like a dream at waking, leaving only the wide, green, empty field under the morning sky. There is the gray sea and the little boat, and the great head risen once from the deep and then sinking softly back, and the water going still. There is the veiled bride at the giant's feast, and the hammer laid at last upon her knees, and the long game quietly won. There is the plain under the failing light, and the guardian laying himself down to rest, his long work finished, his watch at last complete. And there is the new green morning rising up out of the sea, washed clean, and the hammer carried whole through the dark into new and gentle hands. All of it soft now, all of it far away, all of it drifting like smoke rising slow into a still evening sky, thinning, fading, gone. You have come a long way tonight, through the whole of an old and gentle world, and there is nowhere further you need to go. You can set it all down now. Set down the story, set down the day, set down whatever you are still holding. Let your breath grow slow and long and easy. Let it fall like the tide falling, soft and unhurried, out and away. There is nothing to do now but rest. There is nothing to do now but sleep. So let the story go now. Let it grow quiet. Let it settle like the fire settling low, like the last of the light going soft and gray and dim. There is nothing more to follow. There is nothing more to hold. The old world is at rest, and the new morning is far away. And here, now, in this quiet room, in this quiet night, there is only you and your slow breath, and the warm dark folding gently around you. Let your body grow heavy. Let it sink a little deeper into the place where you rest. Feel how it is held. Feel how there is nothing you need to carry. Your shoulders, soft now, your hands, open and still. Your jaw, unclenched. The whole weight of you, let down, let go, given over to the bed beneath you and the night around you. Breathe in, slow and soft, and breathe out, longer, softer, and again. In, gentle. Out, gentle. Let each breath grow a little quieter than the one before. Let each one carry you a little further down. The hall is warm. The fire is low. The door is watched. There is nothing outside that can reach you here. You are safe. You are warm. You are held. There is nothing to do. There is nowhere to go. There is only this, only now, only the soft dark and the slow breath and the quiet. Let the pictures fade. Let the words grow faint. Let my voice grow soft and far, and softer still, until it is only a warmth at the edge of your sleep, a low sound, going quiet. The story is over. The night is here. The long day is done. Let it go. Let it all go. There is nothing left to do. Only rest now. Only breathe. Only sleep. Everything is quiet. Everything is still. Everything is well. You are held. You are safe. You are warm. Let go. Rest now. Sleep.